Good evening. In the compiler design, the subject code is 21 CS601. Myself, Sharmila, assistant professor, R.M.D.E.C college, working in the computer science department. Today video, we're going to discuss about what is a runtime environment. How do we allocate the space for a generated target code and how the data objects of our source program is allocated. In the runtime environment, the place of the data object that can be determined at a compile time will be allocated statically. But in the place of the data objective will be allocated at the runtime. The runtime support packages is loaded together with generated target code. The structure of the runtime supports the package depends upon especially the semantic of procedure in the language. Each execution of procedure is called as activation of that procedure. In that activation of that procedure, we are discussing about that procedure called the procedure activation, the execution, the procedure is completed, whether completed or not, that is called as activation. In that lifetime activation procedure, sequence of steps between the first to last step in the execution, including the procedures called by the procedures, the non-overlapping and called nested activations. And then some procedures contain the recursive and new activation beginning from the recursive procedure. The activation tree, that is a tree, user tree is called as activation tree to store the way control the enters and leaves the activation. In the activation tree, each node represents the activation procedure. Each root represents the activation of the main program. The node A is a parent node. The node B is a control flow from A to B. The node A is left to node B if the lifetime occurs before the lifetime of the B. The activation tree consists of the main program, the procedures, and start begin, the procedure P, the procedure Q begins, ends, Q and S ends, and P S ends. How that enter the main program once it started, enter P, enter Q, enter exit Q, enter exit S, exit P, enter S, and exit S, exit mean. How the procedure activation record in the nested structure is shown here. Then the activation record for the condition they have discussed here. And what's the control stack? What is the depth first traversal? How the stack called the control stack keeps the record track live procedure activation. That activation record is popped when the activation ends. When the node N is at the top of the control of the stack, that stack contains the node along with the path from the N to the root. That variable scope, that a procedure occurrence of the variable, how the local and how the non-local. The local, that is occurrence of the same procedure in which the name is declared. So each and every local and non-local variable, how to declare that, and then how the particular difference is apart from the program they have discussed, how the runtime storage organization is done. For that, we have a diagram called code, static data, stack, heap. You know what is code? That is memory location. Code determines the compilation time. What is a static data? Is a compilation time is given for the particular data. The stack is that in that activation record allocated at the runtime is executed in the stack. That is a space allocated, dynamic allocated for the runtime of a memory allocation area in the C program. In the activation record, how it is called as activation record is it managed using a continuous block of storage. It allocates and deallocates when the procedure is exited. Although that actual location of the activation record is determined at the runtime only, not in the execution time, only in the runtime it's executed, and depends upon the parameter. Its size determines whether it's a runtime. It variable and size, it determines the memory of that particular space. The activation record contains 7 items. One is return value, actual parameter, optional control link, optional access control link, saved mission status, local data, temporaries. In that return value, it will be having the field of calling procedure. In the actual parameter, it will be having the supply parameter to the called procedure. In the optional control link, it will be having the activation record of the caller. In the optional access link, it will be having the activation record, that is non-local data. In the saved mission status, it holds the information about the state of the mission before the procedure is called. The local data holds the local to the execution of the procedure. The temporary variable, temporaries, is called as temporary variable stored in the field of temporary. These are the 7 activation records we'll be having. They given an example for the program how that particular stack is executed for the P and Q. and how the recursive procedure call is happened in the Q1, Q2, Q3, the begin names, and activation record creation, who allocates the entire activation record of a procedure, and then who deallocates, that is callee deallocates the part of allocated callee, and caller deallocates the part of allocated by the callers. This is the creation of the activation record. They have given example for caller activation record and caller's responsibility and callee's responsibility, callee's activation record. The variable length is depends upon the execution time, and the dangling reference they have given one small example. Access to non-local names, that is lexical scope, dynamic scope. Lexical scope, that is in the static. Dynamic scope is dynamic, determines the declaration of the applies the name at the only at the runtime. The lexical scope, it have a procedure, begin in block procedure, access link and display. In that access link, how that particular task is executed for the access link for the recursive procedure parameter. In that display is current activation record, level 1, level 2, level 3, like that it will display. After displaying that, the non-local variable display using the value. The parameter passing method is call by value, call by reference, call by name, that is used for a along. So call by name, call by value, call by reference. So symbol table holds the scope of information. Dynamic scroll uses the control link similar to the access link. Dynamic storage, the allocation have the heap management, that is allocate and deallocate the particular program memory allocation depends upon in the dynamic runtime. So what we have discussed in this particular video is what is the activation record in the runtime procedure, that is runtime environment. What is the activation record? What is the activation tree with one example? What is the control flow? In the activation record, what are the different 7 records will be having? Return value, actual parameter, optional control link, optional access link, saved mission status, local data, temporaries. In the activation record, we have to allocate caller activation, caller responsibility, callee activation, callee responsibility. I hope you understand what is the runtime environment. Thank you.